He thought his twin daughters were gone forever lost to a cruel fate 3 years ago. But then, on a dusty bus cutting through the silent mountains, he heard a song, their voices, alive and real. What he found didn't just break his heart, it shattered his entire world before the story even began. Tell us where you're watching this story in the comments below. And if you love these kinds of tales, don't forget to subscribe for more. Now, settle in and experience a story of lost hope, unexpected reunions, and the price of truth. They say the mountains don't forgive. That once the wind turns and snow starts falling sideways, even the strongest man becomes no more than another lost ghost buried beneath white silence. I used to believe that was just talk stories traded around campfires to scare the greenhorns. But after that winter, after her, I understood. The mountain remembers everything. And kindness has a cost. It started with nothing. Just another frozen morning on a forgotten slope. My boots were torn at the soles, and my coat was a patchwork of memories. I hadn't eaten in 2 days, maybe 3. Not counting a piece of dry bark I chewed until my gums bled. But I was still moving barely. That was the trick to surviving up here. Keep moving until you either find food or die trying. The sky was the color of old steel, and the wind had teeth. I was walking the ridgeline above Hollow Creek, looking for rabbit tracks or a broken branch, any sign of life. That's when I saw it. Red, sharp and sudden against all that white. Blood. At first, I thought it was an animal. Maybe a cougar limped off after a bad fight. But then I saw the trail drag marks. And not from paws. Bare feet. Human. I followed the blood down a narrow game trail that twisted between the pines like a snake, the prints getting weaker, sloppier. Whoever it was, they were fading fast. My gut told me to turn back. Nothing good ever came from following blood. But my feet didn't listen. I found her near the frozen bend of the creek, half buried in snow. She wasn't dead, not yet, but close. Her skin was pale as bone, lips cracked and blue. There was a gash on her leg, deep and raw, already stiff with frozen blood. Her dress was buckskin, torn at the side. Long black hair clung to her face like wet silk, already frosting over. She looked about my age, maybe 16, maybe 17. And she was going to die if I left her there. I don't know why I did it. The smart thing would have been to walk away. Tribes didn't take kindly to strangers meddling in their affairs. Settlers who got involved usually ended up on the wrong end of a knife, or just disappeared. But something in her face, something fragile and fierce, made me kneel. I touched her shoulder. She flinched, her eyes opened just a crack, dark, wild, and full of fear. I raised both hands, tried to show her I meant no harm. She muttered something in a language I didn't understand and pointed weakly east toward the peaks. I knew what lay in that direction. Dead Man's Pass. No one sane crossed that way this time of year. Not unless they had a death wish or a very good reason. She had both. I looked at the wound, at the snow creeping higher up her sides. She had maybe an hour left, maybe less. So I made a decision. I tore up the lining of my coat and bound her leg as best I could. Then I hoisted her onto my back. She weighed less than a sack of oats. I could feel the bones in her shoulders, the heat of fever leaking from her skin. She didn't resist, didn't have the strength to. And then we walked. Through snowdrifts chest deep, across frozen streams slick as glass, up trails barely fit for goats. I used every trick I knew, carried her when I could, dragged her when I couldn't. Every hour, her breath got fainter. Every mile, the wind got stronger. I was sure we'd both die up there. But somehow we made it through. By the time I saw the smoke curling from a distant fire on the far side of the pass, her eyes had rolled back. She hadn't spoken in hours. I laid her at the edge of the clearing, just before the forest opened wide into a narrow valley I'd never dared enter. And then I did something foolish. I stepped back. I didn't wait to be seen. I didn't ask for thanks. I just laid her down and turned around. But before I could vanish into the trees, something cold and smooth was pressed into my hand. It was small, black, a carved stone, warm despite the snow. Her fingers, weak and trembling, had curled around mine. And then she was gone, carried off by figures I barely glimpsed through the trees. I made my way back to my cave alone. Didn't know her name. Didn't ask. Figured I'd never see her again. Just another ghost of the mountain, maybe. But that night, as I sat by my small fire, fingers tracing the strange symbols on the stone, I felt it. Not peace, not relief. Something was coming. The next morning, I saw the hoofprints. Not one or two, dozens, surrounding my cave like a noose. They'd been watching, and they weren't settlers. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. Even with the fire burning low and steady, even with the cave walls holding back the worst of the wind, there was something in the air that wouldn't let me rest. I kept turning the carved stone in my hand, studying its every groove by firelight. I didn't recognize the symbols, at least not in any book I'd seen. But the feeling it gave me, that was something I did recognize. It felt like a warning. When dawn broke, I stepped outside. The snow had slowed during the night, but the wind hadn't. It howled across the cliffs like a dying animal, stripping the trees of their last stubborn needles. That's when I saw them again. Hoofprints. Not one or two, at least 15 horses. Some light, some heavy. I walked the perimeter, counting where I could. They'd been here for hours, circling the cave, studying it, watching me, but I hadn't seen a single face. That was the part that made my skin crawl. I stepped back inside and shut the crude door I'd made from broken fence boards. My hands found the knife at my belt rusted, dull, but still better than nothing. I checked every corner of the cave. Nothing had been stolen, but everything had been touched. Shifted just slightly. The cooking pot faced a different direction. My old saddle blanket was folded wrong. Even the pile of stones I used to weigh down firewood had been disturbed. They weren't here to rob me. They were looking for something. I didn't need to guess what. The stone in my hand was warm again, almost pulsing. I stood still, breath held, listening. That's when I heard it. A branch snapped outside. Not from wind, from weight. I peered through a thin crack in the rock wall and froze. 3 horses, 3 riders, sitting still as statues, not 20 yards away. Their faces were streaked with paint black and red slashes across cheeks and brows. Feathers in their hair, weapons strapped to their backs. The kind of men you didn't mistake for scouts or hunters. These were warriors. They knew I was in here. I didn't know how. Maybe they'd followed my tracks. Maybe they never stopped watching since I left their land. Either way, they had come for something. And they weren't hiding it. One of them raised a hand. It wasn't a threat. It was a signal. Moments later, I heard the sound of more horses hidden behind trees, behind rocks, behind everything I thought was just wilderness. They were surrounding me. The lead rider dismounted. He moved slowly, purposefully. His tomahawk gleamed even under the gray morning light. I recognized the cuts and patterns on his buckskin chief's marks. He stepped closer to the cave, his voice clear, unshaken, and filled with the kind of certainty only old pain could give. "Boy," he said, "who helped our daughter? We know you are there." I didn't answer. Not at first. My throat was too dry. But in that instant, it clicked. Daughter. I hadn't just rescued a girl. I'd rescued their girl. A chief's daughter. A decision that, less than a day ago, felt like a quiet act of mercy now echoed like a war drum through these mountains. I stepped into the light. My knife was still in my hand, but lowered. The carved stone remained hidden in my palm. The chief stared at me, unreadable. His eyes told stories, his mouth didn't. Of battles fought, of things taken and never returned. He didn't thank me. Instead, he said, "We wish to speak." He didn't resist. They led me down the trail, not with threats, but with the silence of men who know exactly what they're doing. I followed, because what else was there? I'd made my choice when I lifted that girl from the snow. Now I had to see where the path ended. Their camp wasn't far hidden in a basin of pine and stone, invisible from above, impossible to approach without being seen. Fires burned low, shielded from the wind. Children moved quietly, guarded by women whose eyes never left me. Every man in that circle carried a weapon within reach, but none of them raised it. I was taken to the center fire, and there she was. The girl, wrapped in furs, leg bandaged, but alive. Her eyes met mine, and she nodded. That small, almost imperceptible motion saved me from what came next. The chief Takakota, they called him, spoke for a long time, about blood spilled on sacred ground, about 3 men who attacked without cause, about fire and rifles and screams in the snow. Then he turned to me and said, "You carried her across the pass? Most men would not. Most fear us. But you did not. So now we ask, will you help again?" I didn't answer. Not right away. Because I knew deep down that this wasn't a request. They wanted vengeance. And I was the only settler left in these parts who hadn't yet picked a side. I could have run. I thought about it. But then Takakota said something that froze the blood in my veins. "The men who attacked us," he said. "They passed near your cave. We followed their trail." I knew instantly what that meant. They suspected me. They thought I might have helped them, might have harbored them, might have been one of them. But Ayana, yes, I finally heard her name. Ayana told them I was different, that I saved her life. Still, their eyes stayed on me like wolves watching a wounded deer. Then the sound of a distant gunshot cracked through the air like a whip. Then another. Then screaming. It was close. Closer than it should have been. We turned as one toward the hills. Takakota's scouts rode in fast. Their words came sharp, tense, urgent. I didn't understand all of it, but I caught enough. The attackers were near. Too near. And they were coming straight for my cave. My shelter. My hiding place. My trap. They'd circled back, maybe to rest, maybe to ambush the tribe. Maybe they thought I was still alone. Maybe they wanted to finish what they started. Whatever their reason, I saw it plain. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. Takakota gave me a choice. Flee now or stand with them. The stone burned in my hand, and my answer was already written. We rode hard through the pines, hooves beating frostbitten ground like war drums. The chief, Takakota, rode ahead, his men close behind. I followed without looking back, the wind cutting at my face and the burn of the carved stone seeping through my coat pocket. Every turn of the trail twisted my gut tighter. I knew exactly where we were headed. Back to my cave. Back to the only place I had ever called home in these godforsaken hills. But it wasn't home anymore. Not with them inside. Takakota didn't ask questions as we rode. He didn't need to. His silence was a mirror of mine. We both knew too well what was waiting. When the cave mouth came into view, I reined in sharply. Smoke curled from the vent in the stone. My fire was lit. Someone was inside. We dismounted. Takakota gestured for 2 of his men to flank the entrance, bows ready, quiet as ghosts. He turned to me, eyes sharp but calm. "You speak to them," he said. "They know your face." I swallowed hard. My fingers brushed the stone in my pocket. Still warm, I stepped toward the cave. Each crunch of snow beneath my boots echoed like thunder in my ears. I paused just before the entrance, raised both hands, and called out, "Don't shoot. It's me, Gideon. I'm coming in." No answer. Only the soft crackle of the fire and the far-off screech of wind against the rock. I stepped inside slowly. The heat hit first, then the smell. Grease, tobacco, gunpowder. And then I saw them. 3 men, all armed. One leaning against my fire pit with his boots up, cleaning a pistol. Another near my bedroll, rifling through my gear. The third, older, with a gray streak in his beard, stood by the wall, studying the drawings I'd carved in my lonelier days. They turned when they saw me. Smiles, but not the kind you trust. "Well, I'll be damned," the old one said. The mountain hermit returns. Gideon, wasn't it? Said the second, tossing aside my canteen. We figured you'd be long dead or deep in a bottle. I didn't answer. My eyes were on their belts, each carried a pistol. One had a rifle nearby, close enough to grab if this went bad. What are you doing here? I asked, keeping my voice level. The old one smiled. Cold out. Snow comin'. And your little hole here's the only warm spot for 10 miles. You weren't home, so we made ourselves comfortable. You followed my tracks. Damn right we did, he said. You ain't subtle, Gideon. That wasn't true. I was subtle. They'd found me because they knew where to look, because someone told them, or because they'd been watching longer than I realized. And then I saw it. The girl's necklace, lying on the table, the one I'd pulled from her throat when I carried her through the pass, made of bone and beads. Sacred, they said. Personal. One of these men had it. You were the ones, I said slowly. You attacked that caravan. You took the girl. The younger one, near my gear, laughed. Hell, we saved her. You think she wanted to be some chief's bride in the woods? We were doing her a favor. The words twisted in my stomach. You left her to die, I said. She ran, said the third man, the one by the fire.
Didn't want to be saved, I guess.
I clenched my fists. The stone in my pocket felt like a hot coal. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it burned stronger around them. The old man must have seen something shift in my face, because his tone changed. You got something to say, Gideon? He asked. Outside, the wind howled louder. I stepped further in, past the threshold, into the warmth of fire and danger. You brought this on yourself, I said quietly. Then I dropped to the ground, just as the arrow whistled in through the opening. Straight through the old man's throat. The cave exploded into chaos. The man by the bed dove for his pistol. The fireside one grabbed his rifle. I rolled behind the stone bench and drew my rusted knife, pointless but familiar. Takakota's men moved like shadows. Another arrow, another scream. The younger one stumbled back, a shaft through his shoulder. Blood spraying the wall. He fell across my bedroll, screaming curses. The third fired blindly into the smoke. Then silence. The kind of silence that doesn't last. I rose slowly. 3 bodies. One still breathing, barely. Takakota entered, quiet as death. He looked at me, then the men, then the necklace on the table. He picked it up, said nothing. I waited for judgment, for fury. But what came instead chilled me to the marrow. This one, he said, pointing at the oldest body. You know his name? He hesitated. No, I do, Takakota said. He once wore our mark. I stared. He was one of you? A long time ago, taken as a child, raised by trappers. Came back once full grown, spoke our tongue, lied with it, killed with it. My knees felt weak. The cave spun. That necklace, I whispered. He kept it as… what? A trophy? Takakota didn't answer. He didn't have to. Outside, the wind picked up. The mountains rumbled low. A storm was coming. But inside, something worse had taken root. This wasn't just about bandits or revenge. It was about betrayal from within, across bloodlines and borders. The men who had haunted these woods weren't just murderers. They were ghosts of another war, one I barely understood. And I was standing in the middle of it. The stone burned hotter in my hand now. And in that heat, I saw something I hadn't before. A map. Not with lines or trails, but names. Names I hadn't heard in years. Names I thought I'd buried with my past. One of them was mine. And the other? I'd have to go back to the beginning to find it. We buried the bodies deep in the snow, far from the cave. Takakota didn't speak as we worked, neither did I. There are some things that pass too far beyond words, like burying a man who once wore your blood, even if he'd long since betrayed it. When we were done, we rode. South, then east, winding down the mountain trail with the wind behind us like a warning. The sun hung low, bleeding orange over the peaks. It felt like the last light I'd see for a while. I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't need to. The stone in my pocket told me, not in words, not even in visions, but in pull, like a needle to north, a heat in the bone, a hum just below hearing. I stopped being surprised by it. I started trusting it. We reached a valley by nightfall, one I hadn't seen since I was a boy. The grass was high and dry, golden even in moonlight. The ridges above shaped like broken teeth. But what made me shiver wasn't the cold or the wolves howling nearby. It was the smell. Old smoke, long dead fire. And something else beneath it, blood, maybe. Or memory. Camp here, Takakota said. We set no fire. No need to invite eyes. I lay under the stars, stone pressed against my chest, and dreamed of dirt and teeth and screaming. In the morning, we found the pit. It looked like nothing, a shallow dent in the earth, half covered by dry weeds and fallen pine needles. But I knew it the moment I saw it. Kneel, Takakota said softly. I did. He stood behind me, hands on his belt, quiet, watching. This is where they brought them, he said. I nodded. This is where you were found. I nodded again. And then he said it. You were not born Gideon. The earth cracked beneath me like a fault line splitting open. He didn't speak. Couldn't. He reached down, brushed aside a patch of dead grass. Underneath, a carving in the dirt. Faded. Old. But I recognized the shape burned into the ground. The same shape etched on the stone. The mark. Who was I asked, barely able to form the words. Takakota didn't answer directly. He sat beside me, pulling out a strip of rawhide and binding it around his wrist. A boy was taken, he said, from our village. During the frost famine, the white trappers came offering food. Instead, they took what they wanted. A woman. A child. And the fire that followed. He trailed off. I knew the rest. I was the child, raised by the same devils who died in my cave. The ones who had whispered lies in my ears for years taught me the gun, not the bow, showed me bottles before books, gave me Gideon, a name not mine, and filled me with their poison. But somewhere deep down, something ancient had survived. The mark, the dreams, the rage. You were not meant to live in silence, Takakota said. The stone brought you back to the beginning, but now it must show you what was buried. He handed me a blade not steel but obsidian, black as midnight, sharp as regret. You'll need this, he said. That night, I returned to the pit alone. I don't know what made me dig. The dreams, the blood, the need to see. The earth was cold, roots tangled like veins, but I kept at it. And then I hit something solid. I clawed it out with shaking hands. It wasn't a bone. It was a box. Small, wooden, wrapped in oilskin. Inside two things. A piece of painted hide with the same mark from the stone, and a bundle of hair tied with red thread. My mother's? Or someone else's? I didn't know. But what mattered more was the note. Carved not with ink, but tiny knife marks barely legible. They are coming back. The mark must return to blood, or it will all burn again. I sat there until dawn. The sun rose blood red, and I understood. The men who killed that caravan, who hunted the girl, who stole the sacred things, they weren't just thieves or exiles. They were part of something older, a sickness buried for decades, now rising. And I was the only one who remembered the first wound, because I was the wound. When I returned to camp, Takakota didn't ask what I found. He only nodded once, then said, "It's time you see the elder." The one from the old village? No, he said. Older. We rode again past rivers frozen solid, past trees gnarled with frost. The land grew stranger, the skies darker, and always the stone pulsed in my hand like a heartbeat. By the third night, I didn't dream at all. By the fourth, I started hearing her voice again. The girl from the caravan, not with words, but in the wind, like something unfinished, calling me back. The elder's hut sat high on a ridge of black stone. She was waiting by the fire when we arrived, eyes white as snow, blind, but when she turned toward me, she smiled. "I remember that face," she whispered. I sang to it once. I fell to my knees. The stone in my hand burned hot enough to scar. She reached out, placed her hand on mine, and the visions came. Fire, chains, children screaming, men in uniforms with no flags. A door slammed shut on light, and then the mark glowing, splitting, buried in ash. I gasped. The hut swirled back into focus. "You are not here to stop what's coming," she said. "You are here to finish what was never done." They say some truths are too old to speak, too sacred to write. So they're carved into the flesh of the land, buried beneath rock, whispered to bones. The elder didn't tell me everything, but what she gave me was worse. She gave me choice. At dawn, I stood on the ridge and looked out over the valley. Below me, fog, thick and gray, curling like smoke from a dying fire. Somewhere down there was the old burial ground, the place the stone wanted me to go, the place my blood remembered. Takakota joined me silently, handing over a bundle wrapped in wolfskin. Inside, fresh clothes, dark and lightless. No metal, no buttons, no scent. Garments for passing unseen. "For the hunt, you'll be alone from here," he said. I didn't ask why. I already knew where I was going. Names didn't matter. Only the mark did, and the will to bleed for it. The trail to the burial ground wasn't a path. It was a sinking. Each step took me deeper into memory, into silence, into what I was before I was Gideon. It took a day to reach the first sign, a tree split in two by lightning, still smoldering. Beneath it, the ground was cracked open, and inside, a skull, no jaw, just hollow sockets, staring upward. I left an offering, a drop of blood, nothing more. The wind howled in response. By nightfall, I reached the edge of the old village, or what was left of it. Charred posts, scattered stones, scraps of burnt fabric fluttering from thorn bushes. Nothing stood, except the totem, 10 feet tall, blackened with ash, carved from old pine, its face worn by rain and time, but the mark remained, etched deep into the wood, the same one I carried. I stepped forward, and the air shifted, like waking a sleeping god. They came at night, not wolves, not men, something in between, shapes in the fog, red eyes in the dark. No footsteps, but the ground shuddered with their movement. He didn't run. I bowed. I whispered the old words Takakota had taught me, words that once meant blood, oath, silence, return. The shapes froze. One stepped forward, a woman, or what used to be one, skin pale as bone, eyes black, mouth stitched shut. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched the stone on my chest, then vanished. Like mist at dawn, I slept inside the ruins. If you can call what happened sleep. In my dream, I saw a tree, not like the one burned on the trail. This one was still alive, vast, gnarled, roots spread across the land like veins. At its base, a boy crying, above, a shadow. And in its hand, the obsidian blade I now carried. It carved the mark into the bark, and the tree bled. I woke, screaming. But I wasn't alone. A figure stood by the totem, wrapped in old leathers, his face hidden beneath a crow feather mask. His voice was low, barely human. "You found the stone?" I stood, the blade in my hand before I even realized. He raised his hands, palms out. "Not here to stop you," he said. "I was sent to see if you'd come, if you'd choose." "Choose what?" I asked. "The blood oath," he said, "to finish what your father began." The word hit like a hammer. Father. I'd never known his name. Only the lies the trappers gave me, that he was weak, drunk, dead. But the man in the mask told me the truth. He'd been a warrior, a guardian of the stone, killed during the last uprising trying to protect the mark from being stolen by the same men who later raised me. They buried his heart here, the masked man said. Literally, he nodded. Only blood can wake what sleeps beneath. We dug together in silence. The soil was soft, damp, with something that wasn't rain. A foot down, we struck wood. Another box, smaller than the first. Inside, not a heart, but a brand. Metal, shaped like the mark, still warm. And a leather strip bearing one word in the old tongue, rise. You don't need revenge, the masked man said. You need memory. I understood. The oath wasn't about killing those who took from me. It was about restoring what was stolen. The land, the names, the line of blood broken by smoke and greed. At sunrise, I branded the mark into my arm. He didn't scream. The fire wasn't pain. It was truth. And when it was done, the ground trembled again. Not from beasts. From the call. Something had woken. I returned to the Elder's Ridge by the third day. Takakota met me halfway up. He saw the brand. Didn't ask questions. Only nodded. The riders have crossed the border, he said. 12 men, all armed, heading for the canyon. The girl, I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I mounted my horse. Tighter grip on the reins. Harder jaw. It wasn't Gideon anymore. I was the mark. And it was time they remembered what they tried to erase. When a man changes his name, it means he's trying to escape something. But when a name returns to him, carved into flesh and bound by fire that's not escape, that's becoming. I rode hard through the canyons, the stone walls echoing the thunder of my horse's hooves like war drums. The branded mark on my arm still burned, as if whispering instructions I couldn't fully understand. The stone around my neck no longer felt like a curse. It was a compass, a key, and now, finally, a weapon. By the time I reached the canyon gate, dusk had begun to fall, not soft and golden, but jagged, blood red, as if the sky itself had been split open. I dismounted and let the horse go. He knew the way home. He didn't. Because there was no home anymore, just the path forward. Through blood, through fire, through truth. The canyon gate was an ancient fissure in the land. A narrow pass cut by wind, rain, and centuries of forgotten footsteps. On each side, the rocks loomed high and hollow, forming natural towers perfect for an ambush. And I knew they were waiting. 12 men. Hired hands, bounty chasers, old ghosts in newer clothes. The same men who'd raised me to kill without asking why now paid to make me disappear for good. Their leader was the same scar-eyed bastard who used to slap the tin cup from my hand when I didn't beg fast enough. Bane. His name was Bane, and I'd carved it into my memory the way he used to carve cuts into my ribs for punishment. I didn't bring a rifle. Didn't need one. All I brought was the blade. Obsidian. Ancient. Restored. And the fire in my veins. They spotted me first. High ground. Crossfire positions. Smart if they'd been hunting an animal. But they were facing something older. Something deeper. Something with nothing left to lose. The first shot rang out a sharp crack that split the silence like a bone. He didn't flinch. Let the bullet pass. It wasn't meant for me. It was a test. The next one wouldn't miss. So I ran. Straight into the canyon throat. Let them follow. Let them think the trap was working. Let them believe I was still the boy they broke. 2 of them came down after me. Brothers, I remembered. Jesse and Cain. One talked too much, the other barely blinked. They cornered me by the dry creek bed. Guns out. Didn't think you'd show up alone, Cain muttered. I didn't, I said. They didn't have time to ask what I meant. The ground beneath them split. Roots thick, gnarled, black as coal shot upward, wrapping their legs like rope. They screamed. The canyon screamed back. The stone pulsed against my chest. Each throb matched the beat of the land. I could feel the memory of everything buried here: warriors, mothers, children, whole villages swallowed by time and smoke. And now, awakened. I didn't kill Jesse and Cain. I let the canyon do it. It was their turn to answer for the blood they spilled. I moved fast, using the echoing walls to scatter my trail. Took out a third with a knife in the dark. His last breath was a wheeze I didn't stick around to hear. The fourth tripped a snare I'd set hours before. A thud, a scream, a silence that made the rest nervous. By the time I reached the ridge that overlooked their campfire, only 7 were left. Bane sat at the center, coat open, gun across his lap. He looked older, not weaker, just more unfinished. He stared into the fire like it owed him something, or like he'd seen something inside it he didn't understand. He didn't look up when I stepped into the circle. Didn't even move. The rest scrambled. Guns, curses, shouts. But Bane just whispered, "Took you long enough, boy." The others fired. 5 of them, surrounding me. But the bullets didn't touch me. They turned in the air, curved by a force they couldn't see, couldn't comprehend. One slammed into the shooter's own throat. Another ricocheted and took off a man's ear. The canyon had chosen, and it had chosen me. I moved like wind between trees. Fast, silent, absolute. My blade found necks, found hearts, found fear. Each man fell not with a scream, but with a question in his eyes, as if dying wasn't the part that scared them. It was why I didn't die. When it was just Bane left, he finally looked at me. I saw it then. The fear, not of death, of memory. He remembered who I was. The boy who buried his baby brother behind the stables. The boy he left bleeding on the winter road with broken hands and a fractured skull. The boy who'd survived and become something else. "I raised you," he said. "You broke me," I replied. He didn't reach for his gun, didn't run, just stood and took off his coat. Chest bare, ribs hollowed by time, scars everywhere. But one mark near his heart caught my eye. A burn, old, shaped like a stone. "You weren't the first," he whispered. "I was the last," I said. Then I drove the blade in, not with anger, not with joy, with completion, with release, with the silence of a chapter ending. When Bane fell, the canyon sighed, as if relieved, as if justice, long starved, had finally tasted blood again. I didn't stay to bury them, didn't take their guns, didn't even take the blade. I left it in Bane's chest, let it rest. It had done its part, so had I. By morning, I reached the far end of the canyon. Beyond it, a vast plain, untouched by war, forgotten by maps. A place where stories weren't written yet, where blood could dry, and healing could begin. But just before I crossed the final ridge, I heard a cry. Not a beast, not a man, a child. There are 2 kinds of silence in the West. The kind you earn, and the kind that warns. That morning, after leaving the canyon behind, I rode into the second kind. I didn't have a name anymore, not really. The men who tried to bury me called me all sorts of things: mutt, bastard, ghost. But as I stood at the edge of that dusty basin, listening to the wind whistle through skeletal trees and cracked riverbeds, I realized something. I'd become the echo they were all afraid of. Not the storm, not the fire, not even death. Just the thing that came after to remember. The child's cry still rang in my ears. I followed it for miles, over hills, through brittle thorn brush, past the bones of wagons and dreams. The trail led me to a dry gulch shaped like a broken smile. At the bottom was what remained of a settlement, one of the old ones. I'd seen dozens like it in my time, burned out, caved in, picked clean by scavengers, both human and worse. But this one was different. The fire here hadn't taken everything. Someone had survived. I moved slowly, rifle low. Footsteps lighter than a shadow, the wind shifted around me like it knew who I was now. I stepped over a shattered doorframe. Inside was a woman mid-30s, maybe. Skin leathered by sun and grit, eyes like hollow glass. She didn't scream when she saw me, didn't move, just whispered, "You're the one from the south, the ghost." I nodded once. She pointed to a corner. There, wrapped in thick, dusty fabric, were two children. One girl, one boy. Not hers. That much was clear from the way she watched them, distant, like she was afraid to touch something so alive. "I didn't kill their mother," she said before I could ask. "She died of fever. I only buried her." That was her defense. Not what she did, but what she didn't. That's what morality looked like out here now. Not kindness, just restraint. I sat down across from her, took off my gloves, let her see the scars. She blinked once. Maybe recognition. Maybe just exhaustion. "They say you burned Fort Lantry," she said. "They tried to burn me first," I answered. Silence again. The good kind this time. Her name was Maureen. She'd been a cook at one of the trade posts, then a courier, then nothing, like the rest of us. The world she knew had collapsed in stages, not with an explosion, but with neglect. First, the mail stopped, then the food, then the men. Only the guns stayed. She fed the children hard biscuits and boiled roots. No meat, not in weeks. One of the kids coughed so hard it bled through the cloth. "There's a place west," she said. "They call it the Tablelands. Rumor says it's green, real green. Trees, water, no fences." Rumors were the last currency out here. I'd traded in worse. I stayed that night. Not for them, but for what they reminded me of. My brother. That sound he made when he slept, the way he'd curl one arm around his ribs like he was protecting something. I saw that same gesture in the little boy by the fire. At dawn, I left. But he didn't go alone. The children were too weak to walk far, so we found a cart, rigged it to a wild Mustang that didn't hate me enough to run off. Maureen came too. Said she owed them more than she could repay. I didn't ask questions. I wasn't that kind of man anymore. We traveled for 6 days. The desert widened first, as if trying to swallow us one last time, then narrowed into rocky veins and sharp ridgelines. At night, I taught the kids how to read wind signs. Maureen taught them how to boil clean water using ash. Together, we gave them something rare, the illusion of normal. But on the 7th day, we reached the bones of a river, and that's where we saw the riders. 7 of them, too clean to be drifters, too quiet to be settlers. These weren't just men, they were hunters. I recognized one tall, scarred cheek, gray duster, Marshal Yarrow. The last time I saw him, he was dragging 3 half-dead teenagers across the border for bounty, smiling the whole time. "Put down the boy," he shouted. "Over my corpse," I replied. He laughed. "Not yet," he said. The shootout started fast. Dust kicked. Guns barked. The sky turned gunmetal. I pushed the kids into the rocks. Maureen grabbed a rifle. To her credit, she didn't miss. Dropped the first rider clean through the neck. The second got closer. Too close. His bullet caught me in the side, hot and deep. But I didn't fall. I rose. I'd felt death before. This wasn't it. This was just another door. And I had the key now. I drew the obsidian blade. Not the one I left in Bane. This one was smaller. Hidden. Forged by the same hand. Mine. I kept it for moments like this when guns weren't enough and words had run dry. I moved through the gunfire like it was memory. Yarrow saw me coming. Raised his pistol. But I was already there. Stale met bone. And his past caught up with him. By the end, 5 riders were dead. 1 ran. 1 bled too much to follow. Maureen stitched my wound using thread torn from her own coat. The children watched, wide-eyed but silent, not afraid, just aware. That night, under a sky full of stars that no longer felt so far away, We camped by the river's edge. Water trickled. Coyotes sang. And for the first time in a long time, I rested. Not because the fight was over, but because I'd remembered why I was still fighting. We weren't survivors anymore. We were a start. And whatever waited in the tablelands, if it even existed, we'd face it together. Not as ghosts. Not as shadows. As people. Still standing. Still moving. Still becoming. They say the desert doesn't kill you. It offers death over and over. In different shapes, at different speeds. But it always gives you a choice. And that's the cruelest part. We rode north by northwest. Maureen was the first to notice the wind change thick with iron and ash. "There's been fire," she said, narrowing her eyes toward the horizon. I knew that smell too well. It was the stench of promises burned to the ground. On the third day after the ambush, the river gave out. Its banks turned to chalk. Fish bones, tadpole corpses, nothing living. The boy, Eli, asked, "Is this the tablelands?" I shook my head. The real answer was worse. Maureen found an old railroad line half buried, rusted through, but still stretching like a spine across the land. "We follow it," she said. "Towns used to live where the tracks ran straight." Used to? That was the West's favorite phrase now. The silence between us grew louder the farther we walked. I saw it in the kids. Exhaustion pressing into their bones like gravity. They didn't ask about food anymore, or water, or if we were close. They just followed. They believed. In me. And that was heavier than any bullet. The next town we found was nothing but teeth. Rows of picket fences with no homes. Doors with no walls. A church bell still hung on its rusted frame, swinging slow in the wind like it was trying to remember the sound of prayer. Inside, we found the dead. 10 bodies, all adults, arranged in a circle, 1 bullet each. Clean. A notebook was pinned to the altar. It read, "We waited. The trains never came. The soldiers turned first. So we turned last." No names. Just that. Just choice. We didn't sleep in that town. Didn't touch the food or water we found either. Too much rot, too much sorrow baked into the wood. By morning, Eli's sister, June, had a fever. Bad one. Maureen gave her willow bark and wet rags. I just sat outside the tent and listened to the coyotes argue in the dark. I wanted to blame someone. The government that collapsed. The outlaws that took what was left. The marshals who turned rogue. But mostly, I blamed myself for ever letting her believe we were going somewhere better. By the 5th day, the fever broke. June opened her eyes and whispered, "You still here?" "Didn't have anywhere better to go," I said. She smiled like that was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. That smile stayed with me. Stildus. That night, Maureen told me something I hadn't expected. "I knew your brother. He didn't speak. Didn't breathe. He passed through my camp, maybe 6 months before the fires started. Quiet. Careful. But his eyes? They were like yours." I wanted to ask more. What he said. Where he went. Who he became. But he didn't. I just let her voice fill the space between us. "He said something strange," she continued. "Said the world broke not because men were evil, but because they were tired. That was Tom, all right. Always saw truth in the cracks. The next day, the horizon changed. Hills sloped wider, soil turned dark. We found trees, real ones, green. Not many, but enough to make us believe. Water trickled down from high rocks, cold and clean. This was it, the edge of the tablelands. Or so we thought. A figure waited for us by the water. Old, broad-shouldered, coat patched a dozen times, beard like sagebrush. He didn't draw a gun, didn't move, just watched. Then he said, "Name's Bram. You don't belong here." I stepped forward. "Neither do you," he nodded slowly. True enough. Bram wasn't a killer. He was worse. He was a caretaker. For the last piece of land that hadn't been claimed, burned, or broken. And he wasn't alone. Behind the rocks and trees, more figures emerged. 12, maybe more. Children, women, men with tired eyes and loaded rifles. They called it the shelf. A slice of the old world balanced on the edge of the new. "We don't take outsiders," Bram said. "You bring fire with you, even if you don't mean to." "I buried the fire," I replied. "A long time ago." He stared at me a long time, then at Maureen, then at the children. "They yours?" "They're ours," Maureen said. Bram sighed, looked at the sky, spoke like it hurt. "One night, food, water. Then you move on." That was mercy. Out here, mercy was rare. That night, we shared food around a low fire. Beans, wild greens, bread made of something bitter but filling. The kids laughed with others their age. June told them how she fought a scorpion with a stick. Eli said I once punched a snake. I didn't, but I let it slide. It was almost peaceful. Maureen sat close, eyes flicking between the shadows. I whispered, "You don't trust them." "Don't trust anyone," she replied. "Not anymore." I understood. But part of me, the part that still remembered songs and Sunday mornings, wanted this to be real. Even if it wasn't. Near midnight, Bram found me, handed me a folded cloth. Inside was a badge, faded, bent, but still whole. "Your brother left it here," he said. I didn't ask why. Didn't need to. He tried to find peace, just like I was trying now. When the sun rose, Bram was waiting again. "Leave," he said, "before your past catches up." I wanted to argue, wanted to stay. But I looked at June, at Eli, at Maureen, and I knew the fire wasn't done chasing us yet. So we left, into the hills, beyond the trees, toward a place with no name, carrying nothing but memory, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, the next silence we found would be the kind we earned. There's a sound the desert makes when it's about to take something from you. It's not wind. It's not silence. It's pause. Like the land itself is holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of man you are when the dust clears. We crossed the edge of the shelf at dawn. No one spoke. Bram watched from the high rock, arms crossed, rifle slung low. Not out of threat, out of understanding. He knew what was coming, and he knew it wouldn't stay on his land. The path wound into a narrow canyon, steep walls, sharp turns, perfect for an ambush. I knew that. Maureen knew it too, but there was no other way forward. Halfway through the canyon, I saw the first sign, an old boot, freshly dropped, still warm to the touch. Then the second sign, a bullet casing, shined clean, placed deliberately. And then, a voice I hadn't heard in 7 years, "Gideon Lee." I froze. Maureen stepped beside me, hand drifting to her revolver. The kids were too far back to see what we saw, but I saw him. Seth, marshal's badge still clipped to his belt. Coat long and dusty, but his boots polished. He wanted to be seen. He wanted this moment to matter. "You've been busy," he said. "Not by choice. You left a lot behind." I left nothing worth keeping. He smiled at that, but it wasn't joy. It was pity. "There's a price for walking out, Gid." "Then take it. Just leave them alone." Seth tilted his head. "I ain't here for them." He stepped forward. "I'm here for you. There's a kind of history men like us carry that no story can fully tell." I remembered the last time we met. So much lost. A town in ashes. A girl's scream echoing in the wind. And a promise I made long ago. Maureen leaned close. "You know him?" "Used to call him brother." Her eyes went cold. "Blood?" "No," I said. "Worse." Seth slowly reached toward his belt. "No badge now," he said. "Just reckoning." "I'm not the same man," I told him. "Good," he said. "Means this will end." Maureen raised her rifle, but I held her back. "Not your fight," I said. She didn't lower it. "Not for him. Not for me." The canyon held its breath. Even the rocks seemed to lean closer. One wrong move, one breath. Seth stepped forward. I was ready. Two sounds, one echo. He faltered. I stood firm. His weapon slipped away. Then stillness. I waited for this, he said quietly. Every night. I know. You should have ended it back then. I thought I had. He smiled sadly. The West never lets you leave clean, Gid. I looked at him. I'm not clean. Never was. He let go. No hate. No peace. Just quiet. Like a fire long burned out. Maureen was silent. So was I. The kids watched quietly as we closed that chapter. Later, we found a rise overlooking the valley. Flickers of firelight camps, maybe a town, real roofs, a water tower, civilization, or what passed for it. June whispered, "Is that it?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Because every time I thought this cursed path ended, it bent again. Maureen sat beside me, pulling her coat tighter. You all right? No. You will be? Don't think so. She nodded. Didn't press. Didn't need to. I held Seth's badge in my hand that night. Not a trophy. Not a memory. A warning. Some morning. Wet ride again. One last time. Toward that last flicker of hope or ruin. And this time, no more running. No more ghosts. Just truth. Whatever it cost. The valley stretched beneath us, frozen and still. The last embers of winter clung stubbornly. The silence pressed like a weight on my chest. I tightened my grip on the carved stone. Its warmth pulsed like a heartbeat. No longer just a token. It was the weight of every choice. Every step through these mountains. Every soul counting on me. Maureen nudged her horse forward. June and Bram flanked me. Faces pale but steady. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were the last thread holding fragile peace. The fires below flickered brighter, a sprawling camp among bare trees. Shadows moved across the frozen riverbed. Men, armed. The ones who started this nightmare. My breath steady though my mind screamed to run, hide, forget. But I couldn't. More than me. More than Maureen or the kids. More than the tribe. This was the line between chaos and order, between vengeance and justice. We rode down, silent, blending with shadows. Cold bit sharp, but fire burned in my gut. At camp's edge, a sound broke the night. A challenge. Then everything changed. Men appeared from behind trees and tents. Rifled, faces tense. Their leader, scarred and wild-eyed, spotted me. He shouted, "Gideon Lee? Thought you could hide?" I didn't answer. I pulled Maureen back, shouted to Bram and June to circle wide. The next 10 minutes were a blur. Gunfire echoed like thunder through the valley. Dirt and rock kicked up in a storm of violence. I ducked behind a fallen log, bullets grazing my coat and slamming into the frozen ground around me. Maureen's rifle cracked with deadly precision, picking off 2 men trying to flank us. June scrambled beside me, eyes wide, heart hammering like mine. "We can't hold this." "No," I gasped. "But we can buy time." The carved stone burned hot in my palm, like it wanted me to do something, anything. I glanced at it, then at the camp's edge, and made a decision that would either save us all or end us in fire and blood. "Follow me!" I yelled, leaping out from cover and charging straight toward the campfire. Bullets whizzed past, men shouting and firing, but I kept running. They weren't expecting me. I reached the fire pit and grabbed a burning ember, the heat searing my fingers. With a quick motion, I threw it into a pile of dry wood and leaves nearby. Flames leapt instantly. Shells exploded. Men scrambled to put out the fire, some cursing, some firing blindly. Maureen and the kids used the confusion to slip around the flank, taking out stragglers. I heard a sharp whistle and turned just in time to see an arrow streak toward me. I ducked, feeling the feather brush past my cheek. The tribe. Takakota and his warriors emerged like ghosts from the trees, arrows flying true, pinning down the attackers. The battle shifted. What had been a desperate skirmish became a calculated war dance. The criminals were surrounded. No escape. The leader growled and fired wildly, but a tomahawk found his neck before he could pull the trigger again. Silence fell, broken only by heavy breaths and the crackling fire. Takakoda stepped forward, his face grim but proud. "You have fought well, brother," he said, voice low. I nodded, exhausted but alive. The prisoners were bound and handed over to the tribal warriors. Maureen approached, eyes searching mine. "We did it." "Yeah," I whispered. "But this is just the beginning." Days later, the cavalry arrived. Captain Morrison was there, eyes sharp, taking in every detail. I told him everything. The attack, the rescue, the tribe's justice. The carved stone lay on the table, between us a symbol of trust, of alliance. The captain studied it, then looked up. "Son, you did what few would have. You saved lives and maybe stopped a war." I looked toward the mountains, toward the cold peaks that had become home and prison. No easy answers, no clean endings, just a path forward. Maureen and the kids stood beside me. The tribe had welcomed us. The stone burned warm in my hand, a reminder of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. The Wild West is a hard place, full of pain, full of loss, but also full of hope. And sometimes, just sometimes, one man's kindness can change everything. If you were in the main character's shoes, would you have fought the same battle? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like the video. Explore the other videos on your screen for more unforgettable stories.